actually a very complex subject. First thought is self-esteem is fundamentally self-confidence in your ability to live and be successful given the facts of reality. So you earn self-esteem by how you live your life. No one can give you self-esteem. You cannot give anybody self-esteem. You cannot give your children self-esteem. Self-esteem is earned. Live your life with integrity. Raise your self-esteem. Second thought about self-esteem. For everybody in this room, the single biggest driver of your self-esteem will be your work. And I use work in the broadest context, raising children, very productive, very hard work. The reason that work is so important is you spend a disproportionate amount of time, effort, and energy at work. So work is the single biggest driver of your self-esteem. Something I say to all the employees of BB&T. It's real important to BB&T that you do your job well. It's far, far, far more important to you. Might fool me about how well you do your job. Might fool your boss about how well you do your job. But you will never fool you. If you don't do your work the best you can possibly do it, give them your level of skill, give them your level of knowledge. You can't do the impossible. But if you don't do your work the best you can possibly do it, you will lower your self-esteem. Now here's the good news. Do your work the best you can possibly do it. Give them your level of skill, give them your level of knowledge, and you will raise your self-esteem. And that's more important than whether you get a promotion or you get more money, because it's about who you are. By the way, as law students, the same is true. Your work is your law work. And if you don't do your school as best you can possibly do it, you will lower your self-esteem, even if you get good grades. And if you do it as best you can possibly do it, you will raise your self-esteem, which is more important than when you get good grades. It's an interesting social issue that draws all this stuff together, and why the American sense of life is so important. Take an entry-level construction worker, a bricklayer. Tough life. Works hard. Raises his family. Reminds me of my granddad. Hard work, tough life. Gets by, raises his children. Maybe his granddaughter becomes CEO of a publicly traded company. Maybe not. He has a hard life, but he gets something very important from that work. He gets pride. He gets pride in himself. He gets self-esteem from that work. Take that same bricklayer and give him welfare. He may be better off economically, but he is far worse off spiritually. He loses pride. He loses his self-esteem, which is a very high price to pay. You know, we're talking a lot of what we do in our public policy has to do with security. And security is very important. We care about security. But the United States is not the land of security. People didn't get on a boat and come to Jamestown to be secure. The United States is the land of opportunity. Opportunity to be great, opportunity to fail and try again, but most importantly, the opportunity of that bricklayer to live his life on his own terms, to pursue his personal happiness in his own context. And that is the American sense of life, and that is what's so very important to protect. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I think we have time for some questions now, a few questions. Yes, sir.
I'm Mike Kelly from University of Florida, and I just want to say you're my new hero.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks very much. I was in the mortgage industry for 5 years.
Okay.
With a very quality company that followed a lot of what I said about BB&T. We wouldn't offer a lot of those products, and I saw a lot of the stuff happen firsthand. It's actually what drove me to come back to law school. I've been doing a lot of study on entrepreneurialism, the phenomenon on that, and how the creative destruction, how you can get into highly regulated industries and really get in and make a difference. And my question to you is very open-ended and not really have a lot of substance to the question, but how can we, following on your admonition at the conclusion, a lot of the students here, a lot of the participants here, we're going to be legislators, we're going to fill public office. How can we invade areas like an entrepreneur and actually take, the high level, make a difference, have self-esteem, but actually really implement that difference?
Well, I think two things. At the legislative level, the biggest thing you do is get rid of regulations, and just in mass. As an individual attorney, I'll offer you a challenge. You never want to violate the law because laws are laws, but at the same time, you want to mostly be disciplined by ethics, clear set of ethical principles. Attorneys that within the law can do what's ethical and come up with better business solutions often are very valuable to businesses. And I would have attorneys that figured out how not to do stuff, and we would have attorneys that would figure out how to do it. Not always within our ethics, but within, technically legal, but the law is a very gray area. So helping businesses figure ways around regulations that are ethical and technically legal, I think, is a very valuable. And I think, I think the truth is our economy couldn't work. If BB&T were to adhere to every single regulation, we'd have to close down because they're in conflict with each other. The Patriot Act and the Privacy Act are conflicting. So we have to have attorneys to figure out how we can actually maneuver within the law. That's a very valuable practical contribution. Yes, ma'am. Okay, that's a pretty complex subject. Here's what I think. There's a very important rule for law. I mean, countries that don't have rule of law don't work, okay? But the purpose of the law is to protect individual rights, not to redistribute wealth. It's the purpose of the law, and that's kind of how our founding fathers started out. And that means we got to have a military to protect us from foreign forces. We got to have police to protect us from each other. We need a really functional court system, which attorneys are a very valuable part of that system. There can be very legitimate disputes among businesses about what we contractually agreed to, and there needs to be laws around that. The regulatory environment needs to only be about protecting individual rights. 95% of regulations aren't. They're mandating behaviors that, in many cases, are actually counterproductive, usually designed actually to protect some inefficient competitor in the marketplace. So you could almost dump the total regulatory structure. I think Frank Dodd is a movement in the wrong direction. The real killer in Frank Dodd that people don't talk much about is the so-called consumer compliance. It's not consumer compliance. It's credit allocation. It's giving the federal government, if you want to control a capitalist economy, control the allocation of credit. In fact, how we got here was the allocation of credit forced on the banking system and really forced on Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae in their defense by Congress through affordable housing. So Frank Dodd is really scary because they can control credit allocation in the U.S. Right now, they're tightening the standards. Long term, they're going to loosen the standards because it's politically, and we're going to set up another bubble. My solution would be to get rid of all the Frank Dodds and go to a private banking system and let people operate with contracts and a court system that would enforce the contracts versus the government forcing lots of agreements that nobody would agree to. And I would go to get rid of the Federal Reserve. I think that would be the beginning step for that. I said this earlier, but it's naive to believe that regulators act in what's called the public good. First, I'm not sure what the public good is, but whatever it is, regulators always act in the regulatory good. It's just some belief that's common in our society. Just because you go work for the government, suddenly you don't have the same kind of incentive system. You just have a different set of incentive systems, and it's just naive to believe that they don't have perverse incentives in that regard. Yes, sir.
Hello, I'm John Wood from Georgetown Law.
Yes, sir.
And I have two challenges to your conclusions about the financial crisis.
Okay.
That